For decades, the world viewed Japan as an economic miracle, a country that has embraced pacifism after the devastation of World War II. Yet beneath this widely accepted image, elements of an earlier political legacy were never fully dismantled. That legacy, shaped by unresolved post-war reckonings, continues to influence Japan's political discourse and strategic choices today.
Takaichi's remarks to the Diet earlier this month. She said that a military emergency concerning Taiwan could be regarded as a situation that might threaten Japan's survival.
世界上只有一个中国，台湾是中国的一部分。
Prime Minister Takaichi's response has largely been self-contradictory. Takaichi should retract her erroneous remarks concerning Taiwan.
日方不能指望一边伤害感情，一边索取利益，这不是同中方打交道的正确方式。
Our nation must take the initiative in radically strengthening its defense capabilities.
What we need is a decent life, not more spending on weapons. Takaichi, what do you have to say about this? How are people actually getting by these days?
To understand the current tensions in East Asia, it is necessary to revisit a critical moment in post-war history. In 1948, as the Cold War intensified, the United States adopted what later known as the reverse course, shifting priorities from demilitarization to rebuilding Japan as an anti-communist ally. Under this policy shift, a number of individuals previously detained as war crime suspects were released. Rather than facing prosecution, some were reintegrated into political and economic life, playing key roles in shaping post-war Japan. Among them was Nobusuke Kishi. A former senior official in wartime Northeast China, Kishi returned to politics and became prime minister in 1957. His tenure strengthened the US-Japan security alliance and marked a turning point in Japan's post-war strategic orientation. By the 1950s, Japan reinterpreted its pacifist constitution and decided that no military did not actually mean no military. They established the self-defense force with land, sea, and air branches, a near full-scale military in everything but name. Kishi's ambition to restore Japan's military stature did not end with his own career. It was later carried forward by his grandson, Shinzo Abe, whose policies reflected a long-standing ambition to expand Japan's security role.
So American pressure on Japan to redefine what had initially been the police force during the Korean War, to rename it the Self-Defense Force, set into motion a pattern of US pressure on Japan to up the game of what is now a full-fledged self-defense military. Japan's leaders really wanted Japan to become a so-called normal nation, and that means having a military that can fight wars. So this is arguably the most divisive question in Japanese society. How should Japanese people define their military? Fast forward to 2015, when former Prime Minister Abe rammed through the collective self-defense legislation. This brought out the largest protests in Japanese history since the protests against America's war in Vietnam in the 1960s. And so what this indicates is this is not a given for Japan, that Japan is in fact becoming a militarist society. What it does indicate is that the Japanese leaders who are working in the structure of the US-Japan alliance are willing to take risks, political risks, to increase the stance of Japanese military. In the summer of 2015, the administration of Abe Shinzo rammed through legislation that most Japanese legal scholars, including Abe's hand-picked constitutional lawyers, agreed was illegal, unconstitutional, and it was done very much to please the American request.
In 2021, Abe shattered decades of diplomatic ambiguity with a single statement.
Abe was speaking virtually to a forum organized by Taiwanese think tank, where he said, and I quote, "A Taiwan emergency is a Japanese emergency and therefore an emergency for the Japan-US alliance."
The remark was widely interpreted in Beijing as crossing a long-standing political red line.
Japan has a legal obligation to provide logistic support to the United States. That means it has to open its bases for Americans to use, in a crisis, in the region. But the point is that Japan doesn't have to fight shoulder to shoulder with American GIs in a war. So the real, assessment, even by some famous think tanks like RAND, is that the Japanese leader will only decide at that moment whether there would be military involved or not. Even if the United States would maintain a policy of strategic ambiguity, and why would the Japanese government maintain a policy of strategic clarity?
While security rhetoric was heartening at home, Japan continued to project a softer image abroad. Anime, video games, fashion, cuisine, and popular culture became central elements of what was branded as cool Japan. This global appeal, though driven largely by market forces, was also supported by sustained government initiatives aimed at reshaping Japan's international image.
皆さん覚えてますか？クールジャパンっていうキャンペーンを一時やって、あのために相当の予算もつけて、世界の何カ国かにそのクールジャパンセンターみたいなのを作ってるんですよ。で、日本には素晴らしいその匠の技とかあるから、それでも置いてるのはいいんだけど、置いてるだけなんですよね。
And if the end goal of a strategic rebranding is to plant the culture in the global imagination of the 21st century as a source of creativity, wonder, and future-facing, architects shunned away from its own history of wars. Since 1982, the Ministry of Education has advised publishers to soften references to wartime aggression, changing the word invasion into advance. And despite agreements to address the comfort women issue, successive political leaders in Japan have denied or minimized the coercive nature of the military sexual slavery system.
The most frustrating part of being a historian working in Japan and between countries in the East Asian neighborhood is when the Japanese government does something positive, such as the 1993 Kono Statement, which accepted Japanese government responsibility for the system of militarized sexual slavery, then subsequent governments pull the rug out and say, well, no, that's not actually what happened. And so progress is made. For example, textbooks actually became much, much better by the early 2000s. And then fast forward to today, when no mention is made not only of the comfort women, Unit 731, Nanjing Massacre, all of these known, well-documented historical atrocities that Japanese school children never learn about. And it's to the real detriment of Japanese society because the knowledge is there. And it's simply a political game that some leaders use to shore up their own support.
This rebranding extends beyond historical memory. Japan's recent defense white papers describe a deteriorating security environment, framing neighboring countries as increasingly serious challenges to national security.
I know Japan will increase its defense budget to 2%, but that means, okay, they believe the situation is becoming more dangerous. But what really are becoming dangerous? China actually in the last 4 decades have gone through trial and tribulations of different sorts, but China still maintain a defense budget, which is in most cases is lower than 1.5%. That tells a lot about China.
In late 2025, leadership passed to Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi, who has openly identified herself as a political successor to Shinzo Abe. Her policy agenda reflects a continuation and, in some areas, an acceleration of Japan's right-wing turn. She has announced plans to hit the 2% GDP defense spending target 2 years ahead of schedule.
Meanwhile, Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth comes to Japan and asks for 3.5%. I don't think that this is viable in Japanese political circles, but Takaichi is saying yes.
The most controversial is her stance on nuclear weapons. She has also raised public debate about Japan's long-standing non-nuclear principles, a sensitive issue in the only country to have experienced atomic bombings.
Они стремятся отменить 4 неядерные принципа. Япония, как единственная страна, пострадавшая от ядерного оружия, придерживается таких вот 4 неписанных. Это не конституция, это не закон, это правила, но все их соблюдали последние годы, которые включают не обзаводиться ядерным оружием. А вот эти реваншистские круги японские, они требуют, чтобы Япония стала ядерной державой. При этом у Японии накоплены значительные запасы плутония оружейного, у нее есть технологии изготовления атомной бомбы, у Японии есть ракеты, которые выходят на околоземную орбиту. Единственное, чего не хватает – политического решения. Так вот, это политическое решение на волне вот этого реваншизма может последовать уже в обозримом будущем. Это, естественно, изменит всю архитектуру политики в Тихоокеанском бассейне.
From the reverse course of 1948 to the Taiwan emergency doctrine of 2025, Japan's post-war settlement left critical historical questions unresolved, questions that continue to resurface during moments of geopolitical stress. Under Prime Minister Takaichi, Japan has moved forward toward defining its security policy through alliance politics, to place confrontation ahead of regional cooperation, to prioritize containing China using Taiwan as a pawn rather than developing a constructive China-Japan relations.
その中国の立場で台湾に何が起ころうが、日本は無関係なんですよ。そこで起きたら、日本に存立危機が起きてきたという理解をしちゃったんです。それはね、やはり最初のこの日中共同声明に全く反してる。だからそれがいけないんですと僕は思いますけど、それで国会答弁ですから、首相のすっごく重みあります。つまりそれは言葉として生きてますから、それをそうじゃありませんと言ったってそれは詭弁になっちゃうでしょ。
Some historians warn that if history is any guide, this approach is unlikely to strengthen autonomy. Instead, it runs the danger of perpetuating dependence, narrowing diplomatic options, and deepening regional tensions.
Fortunately, she has not yet said anything about history, and I actually hope she doesn't, because she is clearly trying to impress people that she's a strong leader. And let's remember, and I think it's important, the gender dynamics here. She is Japan's first female prime minister. Forbes magazine has named her the 3rd most powerful female politician right now, or female leader. She's trying to be tough. So let's just hope she doesn't say anything about history, because that would be a disaster. And she has demonstrated her belief that Japan did nothing wrong by visiting Yasukuni in the past. She has said irresponsible things as a parliamentarian, but she is prime minister now, and maybe she might just concentrate on Japan's economy, which needs her attention more than anything else.
Japan today stands at a crossroads between memory and ambition, restraint and revival. Under right-wing leaders like Sanae Takaichi, ideas once confined to the political fringe are now moving into the center of power. As old legacies return under new slogans, one is left to ask, has Japan truly moved beyond its past, or is it simply learning to live with it?